Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. When it comes to space combat, there's nothing more romantic than the idea of getting inside of a snub fighter and feeling the G's push you into oblivion as you swing yourself onto an enemy fighter's 6 o'clock. It's also one of the most dangerous and probably idiotic jobs you can partake in the Star Wars universe, which is why I really don't recommend you become a starfighter pilot unless you have some really, destiny-driven plot armor that is extremely thick and accessible. But obviously most people won't listen to my safety recommendations and pursue this dangerous line of work anyway. And while training, discipline, and a lot of simulator time will increase your overall survivability, today I want to talk about the actual starfighters you might be putting yourself in. There are a lot of confusing options for a young pilot to choose from, so I thought it'd be interesting to look at 10 different features and design concepts that are very important when looking for a new starfighter. Look, the obvious thing would be for me to recommend you guys always find a snub fighter with a hyperdrive placed inside of it. It allows you to be independent from a carrier ship of some kind, and should your carrier ship get destroyed, you won't be stranded, which is a huge plus. Also, one of the most dangerous moments of any deployment for any starfighter pilot is the second they leave the hangar in the middle of a dogfight. There's limited visibility for the pilot, and it's a perfect bottleneck for enemy fighters to lay traps in. It's much better to just start your attack from hyperspace and a lot safer. You might even get a few minutes unharassed while the enemy is deploying their own fighters. But on the other hand, there's this other aspect that's not talked about. A hyperdrive, even a miniaturized one placed in a starfighter, is ridiculously large, complex, and heavy and expensive. There are certain scenarios where not having one of these bulky hyperdrives can be a huge advantage and save energy and space for weapons, speed, and defenses, especially if you're a pilot for a planetary defense force and garrisoned on a nearby planet of some sort. There are also plenty of cases in history where non-hyperspace capable ships will just outperform the heavier and larger hyperdrive-enabled starships. For instance, during the Galactic Civil War, the much lighter TIE fighters oftentimes overcame X-Wings and A-Wings, and during the Clone Wars, much simpler droid fighters usually beat bulkier hyperdrive-equipped Republic starfighters. This might be another one of those not-too-obvious design features you're going to have to pay attention to. Some snubfighters like the T-65 X-Wing are designed for a wide range of environments. Some snubfighters like the tie-in space superiority fighter should only really be used in space and have airframes that have some severe aerodynamic issues. Other ships like the TIE Striker or the T-16 Skyhopper are purpose-built to take advantage of atmospheric conditions and excel in aerial combat. When choosing your first starfighter, it is incredibly important to figure out which environments that starfighter is actually designed to fly in. Generally, anything that you can put through a wind tunnel and have a decently low drag coefficient is going to be able to perform well in atmosphere. And then more clunky designs that have, for instance, solar panels at right angles just jutting out in random spots are going to probably be built for space maneuvers. Choosing the wrong type of ship for a job can oftentimes be deadly. Believe it or not, having an actual full life support system in your ship is something you might want to consider as well. Some individuals, especially Imperial pilots using the TIE Fighter line, prefer a ship with minimal life support and wear pressurized and heated suits into combat. The idea is that it takes a lot less energy to power a flight suit rather than pressurizing and heating the entire cockpit. Also, in this case, if there is a hull breach, the pilot is already prepared for the, stresses of vacuum. Whereas Rebel pilots like flying around with a 3/4 helmet on, which won't do much in vacuum at all. And so, just like the hyperdrive, having a life support system on your ship is a trade-off between weight and, in this case, comfort and safety. Now, if you're planning on doing long-haul trips in your snubfighter, a full life support system might be necessary, just so you can take off that stuffy helmet from time to time. Now, ultimately, all ships, whether it's a snubfighter or a star destroyer, are limited by how much power they have in their power plants. And no class of ship pushes the envelope more when it comes to how thin the operating margins are than a starfighter. Especially nowadays where starfighters have hyperdrive shields, advanced sensor packages on them, most starfighters are going to be pushing the limits of their power plants way beyond the safe operating margins. Meanwhile, engineers are still trying to decrease the size of these power plants and increase their cooling efficiency. Be especially wary when looking at snubfighters or uglies that have a lot of aftermarket parts. Usually these secondhand ships are not the best designed and will have severe power shortage issues in key systems, which can create serious reliability issues. Astromechs actually serve a lot of different purposes depending on the pilot. For some pilots, an astromech is not only a crew member but also a lifelong friend. More importantly, only astromechs have the ability to calculate multiple hyperspace jumps and keep your snubfighter safe and sound. See, most starfighters do not have the luxury of having an advanced nav computer, so ultimately you're going to be depending on that little droid to make sure that you don't, fly straight into a black hole or some kind of wandering nebula. Also, a well-trained astromech can help with energy management during a dogfight and increase the overall efficiency of your fighter's power plant. This usually involves redirecting energy to the shield's weapons and thrusters whenever you really need them. Astromechs are also known for being able to jerry-rig repairs while in the middle of a dogfight. So always make sure your starfighter has a slot for an astromech. In many cases, an astromech is going to be a lot more useful than a human co-pilot or gunner, and they're going to also take up a lot less space and food. Watch out for certain classes of ships like the Delta 7 Ether Sprite Interceptor. These ships usually have way too thin of a hull and can only accommodate the head portion of an astromech. Always ask permission from your astromech before removing its head from its body, because it can usually create complications later on when you're in a tricky situation like in a dogfight. A ship like the ARC-170, which is not only massive but features medium laser cannons as the ship's main forward armament, has a significant problem in dogfights. While a single shot from a medium laser cannon can obliterate a TIE fighter with one shot and probably take out the entire shield of an X-Wing and damage its components, the cycle rate of a medium cannon is just way too slow to make it efficient for most dogfighting scenarios. As we'll see during the Battle of Coruscant, the ARC-170 will have some real problems tracking and destroying enemy droid fighters, although others have attributed the ARC-170's poor performance to its bulk and lack of maneuverability. The Rebel Alliance in the earlier years of the Galactic Civil War rarely fielded anything larger than a corvette. Yet they were still able to score some pretty remarkable victories against some very well-equipped capital ships. The main cause for the Rebels' success was the fact that they were able to attach proton torpedoes, concussion missiles, and ion weapons onto every one of their snubfighters. Whether it was a tiny A-Wing or a Y-Wing assault bomber, every snubfighter in the Rebel Alliance had anti-capital ship capabilities. This was exactly the opposite of what you would see with a standard TIE fighter, which only had a laser cannon on board. If you really want to make an impact in a larger battlefield, you're going to have a torpedo rack on that starfighter. This is another controversial subject for debate when it comes to starfighter design. While I mainly support the shields over no shield argument, again, this is a discussion about speed, maneuverability, energy efficiency versus defense and bulk. A-Wing pilots commonly strip the shields on their starfighters in order to give their ships even more sublight engine power. This was a direct reaction to the TIE Interceptor, which were unshielded fighters the Empire designed as a reactionary measure after realizing the Rebel fighters were outgunning their TIEs in almost every category. Of course, going back to the Battle of Coruscant again, the heavier ARC-170s, which were heavily shielded, had a lot of problems when compared to the lighter, less shielded Republic fighters that were going up against these unshielded droid fighters. Ideally, you can have a ship that is both very maneuverable and well protected like the X-Wing, but sometimes you're going to have to settle for one or the other. The margins of error for piloting a starfighter are close to zero. There are no self-sealing compartments, no escape pods, no second chances. When you suffer hull breach in a starfighter, it usually means game over, which is why a very advanced and well-designed sensor package on a snubfighter can be the difference between life or death. A sensor package that can properly detect incoming vessels will allow you to properly choose the battle you want to be involved in and help you avoid ridiculous odds and unnecessarily dangerous dogfights. The ARC-170 is famous for its long-range sensors, which was very useful when it came to its solitary recon missions behind enemy lines. Some snubfighters are going to be large and slow enough that they will be designed to house a rear turret that can provide covering fire in a dogfight. Although it is usually pretty hard to hit an enemy fighter with these types of weapons, a good rear gunner will keep enemy fighters on their toe and decrease the amount of time they will have to aim at your ship, increasing your overall survivability rate. So there you have it, guys. Those are 10 different elements that I recommend you take a look at when you're looking for a new Starfighter. But let me know in the comment section below if I've missed anything. I'm sure you guys have a lot of ideas too about what makes a good Starfighter compared to a terrible Starfighter. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. And if you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.